Previously, we spoke about different types of ribbis. And whenever we speak about ribbis, there's ribbis deraisa, ribbis derabanan, and how there's important to know the difference between ribbis deraisa and ribbis derabanan for several nafkaminis. Number one is that ribbis deraisa, also known as ribbis ktsutsa, stipulated ribbis that's stipulated from the outset. I'm going to lend you money on condition that you pay me back more, is called ribbis ktsutsa, and ribbis ktsutsa yaitza b'dayanim. Meaning dayanim will force the lender, if he was over and collected ribbis ktsutsa, to return it. Ma she'en kein ribbis derabanan, which is not ribbis ktsutsa, is there is no obligation to pay it back. However, depends. Sometimes there's an obligation lotzis yidei shamayim to give it back, and sometimes even lotzis yidei shamayim, there is no obligation to return ribbis derabanan, as we'll discuss when we get there. The difference between different types of ribbis derabanan. And that's the main difference. And then there's several other differences between ribbis deraisa and ribbis derabanan. And obviously, it's not specific. It's not specific to ribbis, but when we're dealing with the deraisa, when we're not sure when we have a suffix, we're going to have to be machmer. We're going to have to be strict. And when we're dealing with the derabanan, and we're not sure we have a suffix, then we may be lenient. And in the last shir, we spoke about different types of ribbis deraisa, ribbis ktsutsa. Now we're going to move on to and divide it into two categories: potential ribbis ktsutsa and then ribbis derabanan. As we'll see, most common childhoods are ribbis derabanan. Obviously, ribbis deraisa does come up as well, as we discussed practical examples of that in the previous year, and we'll discuss more in the future. But many of the common ways that ribbis sneaks up on you is a ribbis derabanan. Everyone understands that if you're from Yid, you understand that to lend money on condition that you're going to get back more money is at the very least a shaila of ribbis. So it's easier to avoid that. Okay, so ribbis b'malacha. The Mishnah tells us, but mitzia in hayim at the base, and Salach and Shulchan Aruch, and the Alter Rebbe brings it as well. And just read the lashon of the Alter Rebbe. Yesh ribbis b'malacha. There is such a thing as ribbis b'malacha. Kagain leimer lachaveri asay imi malacha kala va'ani asay imcha malacha kaveda b'mana. For example, to tell your friend, do an easy malacha with me, and in return, on condition that you do this easy malacha with me, I'll do a more difficult malacha with you. Help me build my sukkah, and on condition, in return, I will help you build your sukkah, which is twice the size of mine. Or help me today in the winter, and I'll help you. Or let's not even let's make it simpler. Help me today for 2 hours, and tomorrow I'll help you build your sukkah for 4 hours. Might be the same sukkah, might be the same size, but it's more work. Um, okay, maybe sukkah is not a good example because if it's the same size, why would it take longer? Um, you babysit my kids for 2 hours today, and on condition I'll babysit your kids another day for 4 hours. That is a shaila of ribbis. So in the Mishnah, talking about the example in the Mishnah is field work. Weed my field with me today, and I'll nakesh imchi va'eder imcha, and I'll dig with you tomorrow, or the other way around, or in one season or in another season. Obviously, in a rainy season, it's more difficult to work than in a dry season. On a very hot day, it's more difficult to work than on a nice day. So these are different types of ribbis b'malacha, which are not so common in contemporary life for those who don't have fields. But the examples that we mentioned, that happen all the time. Babysit for me, I'll babysit for you. Build my sukkah, and I'll build your sukkah. Um, I'll take you out to dinner, you'll take me out to dinner. Things like that. So how do we avoid ribbis in such a situation? And the solution that the Pesach can write is that if it's done in a way that there's no hischayvus, there's no obligation, meaning there are neighbors or family members who babysit each other's kids. It's not ribbis. When I babysit your kids, It's not unconditioned that you're going to babysit my kids another day. I'm doing it because you're my neighbor, because this is something that we do for each other. There's no hischayvus. So just because I babysat your kids for you last week and now I'm coming and asking you to babysit my kids, but it's ribbis. You did it for me and now I'm doing it for you. It's not ribbis. There was no hischayvus. When we originally, when the first malacha happened, there was no obligation for it to be paid back with a different malacha. It's just something that happens without any particular commitment to do it again. So that's okay. And that's very common. Um, Obviously, goes without saying that to come over and say, "Can you babysit my kids?" No, but I babysat my your kids for you last week, so you owe me one. The expression "you owe me one" is already it's ribbis territory. So uh, that's something that should be avoided. At the very least, it's ribbis mujeres. But to say that without any particular without any particular his chayvus without any particular commitment or obligation. So that's okay. So therefore, teachers who sometimes cover for each other, or teachers, any shift workers, so you cover my shift, I'll cover your shift. So it should be done in a manner that there is no commitment. I do it for you sometimes, you do it for me sometimes, but there's no you owe me one, I owe you one. That's problematic. Um, Now, just a parenthetical note that I said this is potential ribbis ktsutsa. Now, if you look in the ribbis farm and the malaktim, everyone says kulam ke'achad dahinu fiyamrim, that this is all, that the whole idea of ribbis malacha is only avak ribbis. It's only ribbis derabanan. Where do they get it from? The Chavaz Das. Chavaz Das is a very important place of Bechal, and specifically in Hilchas Ribbis. Um, the Chavaz Das is perhaps better known by his more popular sefer than Sivas HaMishpat on Chaysh Mishpat, but on Yoreh De'ah, his sefer is called Chavaz Das. Doesn't cover the whole Yoreh De'ah, but it covers a few important parts of Yoreh De'ah, Basar B'Chalav, the Ribbis, Hilchas Nida, and Hilchas Ribbis. So the Chavaz Das was a staple in Hilchas Ribbis, writes in Simkov Samachalef, Sifkat and Aleph, that the whole idea of Ribbis Malacha is only Midrabanan, and all the Malachtim quote him without any comment. There's another sefer on the Chavaz Das is not the only one who says this. There's a sefer in Hilchos Shabbos called Torah Zahav, not to be confused with the Torah Zahav, was a Taz, a primary commentary on the Shulchan Aruch in there. And this is Torah Zahav with a Taf. It's just interesting. The pasuk in Shir Shirim is Torah Zahav Nasalachim Nekudas Hakasaf. It's with a Taf. The Taz changed it to a Tes. I never saw it written anywhere, Pashas, because it's a commentary on the four Turim, so it's a play on words on the pasuk. Tur Zahav, because it's on the Tur here there. However, the Tur Zahav is a Sefer on Hilchos Service written by the Haran Stipler. Uh, his name was Mordechai Dave Tversky. He has other importance for him. Primarily, he's famous for his Sefer Chibur L'Tahara until Sedayim and on Mikvahs, but he has a Sefer Torah Zahav on Ribbis, which it's interesting. He writes that he wrote it for himself. He didn't write it as a Sefer to publish, and indeed it was published only after his death by his children. But he wrote it for himself as he was learning Hilchas Ribbis. Um, Another interesting thing is he was an Einikol of the Alter Rebbe, but it seems from what I've seen, he does not quote the Alter Rebbe at all in Hilchos Ribbis, and the Alter Rebbe in Hilchos Ribbis was on a print for many years, so that makes sense. Because if it wasn't print, it doesn't make sense that he wouldn't quote the Alter Rebbe. Not for many reasons, not least of which is that he was his Einikol, and in his other Sefer Chibur Tahara, he quotes the Alter Rebbe with utmost reverence. So it seems that he did not have the Alter Rebbe, and some of the things, at least from what I've seen, is the way he paskins in Terezav is not like how the Alter Rebbe paskins in Hilchos Ribbis, which again makes sense if he did not see the Alter Rebbe. Anyway, the Teri Zahav writes by Richus. The Chavaz Das writes it very, very bekitzer, like B'derech Chag, where he says obviously it's all Madarabanan, but the Teri Zahav writes by Richus to prove based on Gemara and Bava Basra, and then later in Hilchos and Simcha Fayin Vav that this whole thing is only Midirabanan. However, just would like to point out that it's not so straightforward. It's really not so straightforward. First of all, Rashi in the Gemara, and Ein Hamed Beis, Ein Hamed Aleph, actually, um, when he talks about ribbis Malacha, Rashi uses the word agar natar le, which, as we discussed in a previous year, the words agar natar le is a synonym for ribbis deraisa. It's also the mashmos of the Torah. The Torah himself acknowledges this, and he says it's much more like this from Rashi, it's much more like this from the Torah, but Lav Dafka, and he has a proof from Gemara Babasar, which is a very strong proof. But more than the mashmos and Rashi, and more than the mashmos in the Torah, you have Lavush, which for some reason all the Malaktim quote the Chavaz Das completely overlook the Lavush. The Lavush writes basically, I don't think it gets more explicit than this. Afal gav the neshacha omer b'teir b'ferish loy nemer ela b'kesa ve'oichel. Even though the neshech, which is ribbis, that it speaks about in Torah, only speak. What does it say in Torah? It says about money. Neshech kasef, neshech eichel speaks about money and speaks about food. However, Mikol Makim says the Lavush ribsa hatera neshech kol davar asher yishach. Neshech kol davar, anything that is paid back in a manner of interest is considered ribbis. The rabbis call me neshech shasurin v'loy levad b'kasef eichel v'alafilu b'chol davar. Not only food and money, says the Lavush, anything. Therefore, one should not say to his friend, do a melacha with me, on condition that I will do another melacha with you. And the Levush goes on, Barichus, um, to twist the words of Levush somehow that he's saying that it's not deraisa is very far-fetched. The Pashtus is saying it's deraisa. So at the very least, you have a machlokes. Chavaz Das is entitled to disagree with the Levush. But at the very least, it's not so clear cut, and there's somewhat of a machlekes. Um, and again, in the svara of it, we can look at it at least mentally. There's room to look at it in a few different ways. To be medayik, I don't want to start getting into the Yukim and the Alter Rebbe and the Torah because you can be medayik lakan. But I just wanted to make that point that, as I mentioned, we're dealing with potential ribbis ktsutsa, potential ribbis deraisa. Again, obviously it has to. Everyone would agree that it would only be deraisa if it's in a manner of ktsitsa. Babysit for me on condition that I will babysit for you in return next week for a longer amount of time, or for more kids, or for harder kids, harder age, whatever. If you're paying back more, then there is definitely an isser of ribbis and potentially a shaila of ribbis deraisa, and the way to do it in a manner that would be permitted would be to do it without his chayvus, as mentioned. Okay. Based on this din of ribbis b'malacha, Rishonim speak about a similar case, which at first glance may even seem to be an identical case. Case as follows: lend me money on condition that I will lend you money. Lend me $1,000 on condition that in 6 months from now I'll lend you $1,000. So, at first glance, and some Rishonim taka say this, it seems exactly the same thing. It's quid pro quo. You do for me, and I'll do it for you. And as long as it's quid pro quo, it's exactly reciprocal. There's no more. Then it should be mutter. I'll build your sukkah on condition that you help me build my sukkah that's exactly the same size for the exact same amount of hours under the exact same conditions. I'll lend you $1,000 on the condition that you lend me $1,000 under the same terms and the same conditions. And therefore, some Rishonim say that this is indeed permitted because lend me money on condition that I'll lend you money is exactly the same as do melacha for me on condition that I will do the same melacha for you. So, okay. Oh, needless to say, that everyone would agree that I'll lend you $1,000 on condition that you'll lend me $2,000 in return would be us. It's just that's like saying do malacha for me on condition that I'll do a greater malacha for you in return. But for the same amount of money, that would be okay. However, there are other Rishonim who disagree. And they say that no, there's a difference. When I do a malacha for you, you owe me something in return. You can pay me in money, you can pay me in malacha. That's fine. When I lend you money and you pay me back, do I owe you anything anymore? No. So anything that I give you beyond the repayment of the loan is ribbis. It's not just stam ribbis, it's ribbis deraisa. This is clear. This is ribbis deraisa if it's stipulated at the time of the loan. So I lend you $1,000. What do you owe me now? $1,000. You don't owe me $1,000 and a reciprocal loan of $1,000. So once you pay me back $1,000 to extend to me an additional loan is usr. It's mam shirvus. The Rama and Shulchan Aruch brings these two opinions, Bestam ve Yesh Emrim. And Bestam he brings a stringent opinion, and Yesh Emrim he brings in other words, Bestam he brings first he brings the more stringent opinion without any qualifiers, without some say or according to some opinions, and then he says Yesh Emrim, and some say that this is permitted. So the rule is that when the Pesach brings Stam ve Yesh Emrim, Halacha Kestam, when he brings one opinion without any qualifying statements, and then he brings but some say differently, means to rule like the first opinion. The Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, brings these two opinions as follows. V'chein asur leimar, v'chein, and so too, because previously he spoke about ribbis b'melacha, do malacha for me on condition that I will do malacha for you. Likewise, he says, asur leimar halveini mana al chedesh, lend me money for a month, v'ani alvecha mana al yosem chedesh, yosem mimana al chedesh, and I, in return, will lend you money for longer than a month, or even for the same amount of time, but more money, as long as you're getting in return more than what you originally gave. So that would be ribbis. So that everyone agrees is ribbis. To give a bigger loan in return for a smaller loan, or even a loan for the same amount of time, but under greater terms, in other words, a loan for 2 months instead of 1 month, that's ribbis. Everyone agrees that's ribbis. That even to say, lend me a mana, which is the amount of money, let's say $1,000, al chedesh for a month. But al v'chamana al chedesh acher, and I in return will lend you the same amount of money for the same amount of time. Harizu ribis gemura shel teira. This is ribis midarais. Shehalva ein adayim la malacha shenait la malacha schar. Because a loan is not like melacha, for which one receives payment when you do malacha. You get paid for doing the malacha. Mali peria b'mois, mali peria b'malacha kol shishav l'sheinu. What's the difference if I pay you for your malacha with money, or if I pay you for doing another malacha in return? So I did a malacha for you. Now you owe me payment. You can pay me money. You can pay me malacha. That's fine. That's permitted. Mashenkin halva kol shenit al schar ala filo balva shavala. However, halva is different. Loan is different. Any additional gain that you receive for extending a loan, even if it's in the form of an equal loan. This would be ribbis gmura shaltera, ribbis deraisa total, ribbis deraisa if it was stipulated at the time of the loan, or at the time that the loan was extended, as we spoke about previously, that at any point that it was stipulated, even if it wasn't stipulated originally when the loan was extended, but when the borrower came to request more time to pay back the loan, it was stipulated that I'll give you more time on condition that you pay back more. That is ribbis deraisa. Says the Alter Rebbe, if one came by himself to, in other words, Reuven lends money to Shimon without any stipulation that in return you'll lend me money back in 6 months, and 6 months later, Reuven, after the loan was already repaid, Reuven, the original lender, comes to Shimon, the original borrower, and says, "Can I borrow some money?" And Shimon doesn't really want to do it, but he says, "Well, I kind of have to because he lent me money." That would be not ribbis deraisa, but it would be ribbis derabanan because ribbis milcheres. Ribbis milcheres is ribbis that was not stipulated at the time of the loan, but it's given at a later date in return for the loan, as we'll discuss ribbis milcheres at length. That'll be the next topic. So it's mashma that from the Alter Rebbe that if it wasn't stipulated at the time of the loan, and when the second loan takes place, it's not connected to the original loan. It's just Stan. He came to ask him for a loan, and sure, I'll give you a loan. Nice guy. Or for a different reason, completely different reason, not even Bastam, but whatever, for whatever reason you could come up with. But the reason is not because you lent me money 6 months ago. That would be mutter. However, to do it at a later time, even if it wasn't stipulated at the time of the original loan, but it's connected to the original loan, that would be ribbis derabanan. If it was stipulated at the beginning or at any point before the money was paid back while the loan was still in effect, there was an extension that was stipulated on conditional on returning more, giving another loan in return. That would be ribbis deraisa. So we have a machlikas, as we mentioned, loans for loans. To give a loan in exchange, in return for a loan that was extended originally, is that on the one hand completely mutter if it's an equal loan, like the first opinion, like it's malacha for malacha, or is it ribbis deraisa mamash? Says the Alter Rebbe, "Olinin halacha b'shal teira halecha chayar machmer." When we're dealing with the deraisa, we have to be machmer. So to stipulate at the time of the loan, lend me money on condition that I will lend you money, or I will lend you money on the condition that you will lend give me a loan, even for the same amount of money at the same amount of time at a later date. The Alter Rebbe says it should be machmer because this is a shaila according to the second opinion. In Rishonim, this is a ribbis deraisa. Ubishal seifrim halecha chayar hamekel. However, when it comes to ribbis derabanan, you could be mekel. What's ribbis derabanan? We just said. If it wasn't stipulated at the time of the original loan, 6 months later, Reuben comes to Shimon and he says, "Can I borrow $1,000?" And Shimon says, "Yes, I'll give you $1,000 because you were very nice to me 6 months ago and you lent me $1,000." That is ribbis derabanan. It's ribbis milcheres. And the Alter Rebbe says you could be mekel. V'hamachmer tavei alav bracha. And one who is machmer, even in such a case, um, will receive a bracha from the Alter Rebbe. So if you want to receive a bracha from the Alter Rebbe, it should always be machmer. But in such a case, when there's a pressing need to be mekel, or you feel you have enough brachas already, so then when we're dealing with a ribbis derabanan, so then there is room to be mekel. But ribbis deraisa, um, the the ruling of the Alter Rebbe and the implied ruling of the Rama, as we mentioned, is to be machmer. Okay. With that, we'll conclude for today, and then next year we'll get into ribbis mukdamis, ribbis mecheres, ribbis b'shas b'roin. These are bona fide ribbis derabanan for sure. L'kuli alma, except certain cases, as we'll see, where you can turn it into ribbis deraisa. But that's going to be real ribbis derabanan. So just to recap, previous year we spoke about real ribbis deraisa. Today we spoke about potential ribbis deraisa, and uh, moving forward we'll get into ribbis derabanan.